Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a undercolor of law analysis of the TikTok ban and the Musk administration's attempt to ask the Supreme Court to slow things down. So welcome to the new studio. We're still working out some glitches here, so bear with us, but I think we're ready to go. The incoming Trump-Musk administration continues to act as though it's already in power and continues to give us hints as to just how it's going to exercise its power once it's actually in office. Just as you have Elon Musk right now telling Congress what to do and what not to do with regard to the continuing resolution about the budget to finance the country and his secret meetings with foreign leaders, we now have the soon-to-be nominee to be the Solicitor General of the United States, John Sauer, telling the Supreme Court what to do about the TikTok ban. He wrote something called an amicus brief, friend of the court, but this request that he made has a number of legal flaws, as Professor Steve Vladeck summarizes it very well. One problem is that he's asking the Supreme Court to do something it can't do. And Trump, via Sauer, wants SCOTUS to delay the ban on TikTok from going into effect until after Trump is in office for legally non-existent reasons. That's the reasons that he gives in his brief. So we'll put up an article that's talking about this request, and I want to draw your attention to the particular language that Sauer uses. So he says that Trump takes no position on the underlying merits of the dispute. Instead, he's respectfully asking the court to consider staying the act's deadline for divestment of January 19th, 2025, while it considers the merits of this case. He wants this so that Trump's incoming administration has the opportunity to pursue a political resolution of the questions at issue in the case. Now, here's the problem. The court can't stay a law. It can only stay, meaning stop, judicial actions. It can enjoin a law potentially by granting an emergency injunction, which is different than a stay. And that's actually what TikTok asked for, and I think the ACLU also joined in that because of their arguments that this is a First Amendment concern. They don't want this ban to go into effect. So CNN seems to get a little bit off here, and we'll analyze a little bit. I want to play a quick clip of their analysis of it here.
Let's begin with the focus of Trump's argument here. I mean, there's a lot in here. He's a trailblazer in social media, therefore he knows more. He's a great negotiator, which is something that he says about really virtually every issue on the planet. He could find a better way forward. He sets aside the First Amendment arguments for now, arguing for this delay here. What's your review of the legal arguments he makes?
Well, Jim, very unusual legal arguments to say the least. And let's talk about what the legal standard is to seek a stay. The legal standard is irreparable harm. That's one aspect. That's one prong. There you can talk about the First Amendment issue. That is a very valid concern and something the Supreme Court can take up as this case works its way through the appellate courts. The second is likelihood of success on the merits. Right. We see him actually in writing put that aside and say we're not really going to comment on whether or not this is violative of First Amendment.
So that analysis is a little bit off just because of what I said. The real point isn't that Sauer's asking for a stay. They're applying an injunction analysis to what they're terming a stay, which is just inaccurate. The distinction here is subtle, but it does have a lot of significance. Because a stay, as I said, just pauses a judicial proceeding. That's not what the problem is here. The problem is that on January 19th, a ban's going to go into effect unless an injunction stops that law from happening. That is what TikTok wants. The real underlying question is, does the law violate the First Amendment? Okay, that's not really the underlying question. The underlying question is whether the Chinese government has implanted spyware and malware on TikTok that's going to be on all our phones. But the argument for the ban is that the ownership of TikTok, being Chinese, is a security risk because of the possibility of the Chinese government controlling the app. And that ban's going to take effect unless TikTok is bought or sold to a controlling U.S. interest. So holding aside the factual question of what security risk does the government ownership actually pose, I did put up a tongue-in-cheek post on Blue Sky questioning which owners of social media currently pose a greater security risk to the U.S. Just hold that thought. However, if you take a look at the problem here that's being posed for the Supreme Court, or rather reflects the problem that the Trump administration is going to bring to its wielding of the judicial system, or trying to wield the judicial system in its favor, they're correctly referring to this issue in the press at times as an injunction. Why does this matter? A stay won't do anything. The law has to be stopped from going into effect. And in the application for the injunction, SCOTUS basically rejected the idea of the injunction, or simply didn't talk about it. Rather, what they did was they granted at warp speed a full hearing on the case on January 10th before Trump takes office. And who knows, maybe they'll actually rule before Trump comes into power. But SCOTUS, Supreme Court, has not granted an injunction, and absent that, it goes into effect on the 19th. So the incoming Solicitor General of the United States ignored this legal nicety, and he should know this, obviously. I mean, he's been a Solicitor General of a state before, or maybe more importantly, he doesn't care. He knows it, but he doesn't care. In his amicus brief, most of his language was really more about blabbing and kissing up to Trump, talking about, what a great talent he is at negotiating and such. There's like no legal merit, no legal analysis, no legal citations in that brief whatsoever. It was all kissing up to Trump. So the real point that Sauer is making here is he's trying to amass more and more power for the executive, for his boss. And it's really a bit like the so-called unitary executive theory, which says that the president has absolute power over the executive branch. And in that sense, that's already embraced by the Supreme Court, right? They gave him immunity. You're also seeing that attitude reflected in the obey in advance type behavior by Christopher Wray, who's FBI director, resigning before his term is up. Because the original unitary executive notion does arise from just how much removal power the president has. And it talks about removing people who have a term of years, not for cause, just yanking them and replacing them. Perhaps this is a distinction without difference, because you can always find a cause to fire someone, but that's the notion that the president has complete power over the executive branch. These terms don't matter. He's the boss. However, what this is really telling us is Trump's DOJ is going to be moving far beyond the idea of just removal power. Now, one legal commentator, very respected, Jack Goldsmith, former top DOJ official during Bush II, thinks this is a bad way for Trump to start. He thinks it's a bad look for Sauer. It's going to come back to haunt him. The opinion piece refers to it as being self-defeating and diminishing Trump and presumably Sauer's credibility before the court, the Supreme Court, even before assuming office. We'll show you Goldsmith's post there. That seems pretty unlikely to me, in the sense it's going to diminish his standing. I'm a little more in line with some of the replies. Because keep in mind, what is it that the Solicitor General, known as the SG, actually does? We'll put up our familiar org chart about DOJ. And you see the authority of the SG in the pecking order is right in line with the Associate Attorney General, who's usually thought of as number 3. But the Associate AG oversees all civil matters. You also see how little there is under the SG, meaning it's not like a whole bunch of divisions, it's just their office. You see all of the other things on the chart. There are all these divisions and offices underneath it. But the SG's office is all by itself. It controls the SG's office only. Why? Because it's so powerful, it doesn't need to be in charge of a lot of other things. Take a look at the description that they put out. We can read it together. The task of the SG's office is to supervise and conduct government litigation in the United States Supreme Court. Virtually all such litigation is channeled through the office of the Solicitor General and is actively conducted by the office. The United States is involved in approximately 2/3 of all the cases the U.S. Supreme Court decides on the merits each year. So think about that. 2/3 of the cases before SCOTUS are all DOJ cases. It goes on to describe, the Solicitor General determines the cases in which Supreme Court review will be sought by the government and the positions the government takes, and the staff participates in preparing the petitions, briefs, other papers. Importantly, it's Solicitor General conducts the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. It's not just him, it's all his deputies do it or her. Now, this is something that's really critical. The vast majority of cases are argued by the Solicitor General in the Supreme Court, but another responsibility, as we read further down, is to review all cases decided adversely to the government in the lower courts to determine whether they should be appealed or not and what position to take. So they have an enormous amount of power over what law the U.S. is trying to make, not only at the Supreme Court, but in the lower courts to appeal to get up there. And the fact that 2/3 of the cases before SCOTUS are all with the DOJ really points out just how powerful that position Sauer is going to have is. It's sometimes referred to as the 10th justice. There are 9 justices, and the Solicitor General is considered sometimes the 10th justice. That's how much power they wield. So in the long run, I personally don't think it matters too much if they ban TikTok or not, if the Trump administration wants it to continue. And I take the view that Congress should be able to make laws about national security threats. Maybe they're wrong, maybe they aren't, but being wrong isn't unconstitutional. So while there's a First Amendment concern to balance, I think when you take a look at the constitutionality of the statute, Congress wins because that's what they're there for. They are allowed to make laws regarding national security. But the reason I don't think this may matter too much, depending on which way Trump, or rather Musk, comes down on this, is because how does it get enforced, right? What if the Supreme Court says, okay, it's constitutional, let the ban go forward? Well, at the real nitty-gritty level, it's will the app stores yank the app? And will the internet service providers stop allowing it to be provided because they're worried that DOJ is going to enforce it? But what if DOJ says we're not going to enforce it? Are they really going to be that worried about it? So again, it's the idea of how much power can be amassed for the president here. And if we look at this one article I really commend to you by this scholar about the power of the unitary executive notion, that's something important to keep in mind. And that's something we want to keep our eye on as the administration comes into power, because they're going to keep pushing this point of expanding Trump's power, keep talking about it in other guises, maybe unitary executive, separation of powers, but it's all to expand his power at the expense of other branches of the government. So that's what we want to keep our eyes on. So good to see you. Hope you like the new set. Let me know if there are adjustments we should make, and I'll keep reading those replies and try to reply to you when I can. Thanks for watching.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.